walking tour. It's not the first, it won't be the last. There's a reason that we're starting outside the New Lane Gallery. Inside this gallery is a portrait of Anna Haslam. Anna Haslam and her husband Thomas set up the first Dublin Women's Suffrage Association in 1876. Now there were there were many issues at the time. Two of the main issues, of course, were the vote, and the second was the attempt to repeal the Contagious Diseases Act of 1860. The Contagious Diseases Act was introduced across the border, across Great Britain and Ireland in 1860, in theory as a way of reducing the spread of venereal diseases and sexual diseases, especially amongst military bases and naval bases in England. In practice, what this meant was that the authorities could randomly arrest women that they suspected of being prostitutes and test them for these diseases, completely removing any degree of culpability from the men who were actually soliciting these women for sex. And this act was successfully repealed due to the work of Anna Haslam and feminists across the kind of collaboration of suffrage groups across Ireland and England. Now, of course, the second main issue was the vote, and at age 89, Anna took her first vote in the 1980 elections, which saw Countess Margaret being appointed into the Dáil, the absentee Dáil, as part of Sinn Féin. Her husband Thomas died a year before this, and she died herself 4 years after casting her first ballot. So her importance can't be reduced. And although her group was a completely passive group, and did not advocate any sort of militant action, there was a break in discourse at that time between herself and people like Hannah Skeffington, who said that militant action could be beneficial. Now, she couldn't publicly come out in solidarity with this, but she did used to bring Hannah Skeffington Loganberry jam that she made in prison as a sign of kind of private solidarity with the work that was being done. Of course, another reason that we're standing out here is the debate about women artists and who is represented and who is depicting and who is depicted in galleries. Now, the Hugh Lane isn't the worst. It's only 90% male artists inside. The National Art Gallery is languishing a bit. That's 95% male. But inside here, we do see the work of women like Evie Hone and Mamie Jellett and Nora McGuinness, who were absolutely instrumental at the time in kind of the abstract art movement in Ireland and the Cubist movement. And they so prolific were these women that almost all of the founding members of the exhibition of Irish Living Art, which featured people like Louis Labrocki, were women, until of course it was a slight shift in the committee board and became mostly male. Now, these women, their reception to their work at the time was of course not very favourable, to the extent that Mamie Jellett's work was considered to be an artistic malaria that was spreading through Europe. And beyond this, the visitors book at the first exhibition of the living artists has a particular quote from a man who said that the work inside this building would make women scream and children bawl. So they had a great struggle themselves to get their work recognised. Of course, now they're very canonical, and a nod to this was made in 1987 by Pauline Cummins. Pauline Cummins set up the Women Artists Action Group, which was kind of one of the first official groups to actually aim at changing the ratio of women artists and to increasing the visibility of women artists in gallery spaces all over Ireland. When she said that the feminist cause was one of the most important cause in art making since the Cubists. So, of course, you know, a nod here to the work that was done by these women in the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s. Since then, there hasn't really been one specific group. This group disbanded, this Pauline Cummins group disbanded in 1991, and since then there hasn't really been a single group that has dedicated itself to redressing the imbalances that we see in gallery space across the world and across Ireland. So in 2009, the Guerrilla Girls, who you might be familiar with, who address the same problems, but they do it through more creative action, kind of photo bombing, photo shoots with Yoko Ono and gorilla masks, this kind of thing. In 2009, they launched a post-campaign in Ireland, which stated that although 70% of all the students in NCAD, which is the National College of Art and Design in Dublin, were female, 89% of their lecturers and their heads of department were male. And what's more is that despite the fact that only 35% of the Irish artists sent to the Venice Biennale over the course of the however long Ireland has been sending artists to the Venice Biennale were women, 80% of people who were winning international prizes, such as the IB competition and competition for grants, were women themselves. So obviously there's a huge discrepancy here. Of course, in this issue of who is depicting who, and bodily autonomy, and of course how women are being depicted, kind of by the fact that across that big blue bus is the Return to Hospital, which is one of the many maternity hospitals in Dublin. The Return to Hospital was a site in which symphysiotomy was practiced. Symphysiotomy is a procedure which has really just come into the public light now, even though the consequences of it were affecting women, completely altered the lives of women to whom the procedure was performed on. Return to Hospital wasn't the worst. Holles Street and Our Lady of Lourdes in Drogheda are considered to be, now Rotunda is Protestant owned, this might have something to do with it, because symphysiotomy was a procedure that was supposed to deal with women who couldn't give birth the natural way through the birth canal, and instead of a caesarean section, a pelvic saw, well, a saw would break the pelvic bone and the child would be pulled out that way. Now you might wonder why on earth would we resort to symphysiotomy when Ireland was apparently the only developed nation in the 20th century to still be using this. This kind of was a method that was concocted in the medieval ages. When we have caesarean sections being far more verified and practiced throughout the world. Well, the answer is the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, because you're going to have so many caesarean sections in your life due to scar tissue, thought of caesarean sections then as a method of contraception. And they thought that it would lead women to birth control and to inquiring about birth control. So what would often happen is that women would see a priest before they would see a doctor in the hospital. Often these women were giving birth to their first child, so they had no prior experience of what to expect. And the consequences, even though there was no aftercare, the consequences were completely life-altering. Many women never walked again, many women were in wheelchairs, lifelong incontinence. Some of you might be familiar with the activist Frank Crummy. He he was involved in setting up Mary Stopes, the first Mary Stopes clinic in Dublin. And he met a woman once who only realised that something untoward had been done to her when she was trying to push her buggy, and she couldn't because her hip was still broken. Because obviously many of these women were never even told after the procedure what had actually happened to them. Now in 2010 there was an appeal brought to Mary Harney which she rejected for an independent inquiry to be set up and some kind of redress scheme to be introduced for these women. She, as I said, rejected it. Now only 200 women of 1,500 are still alive today who went through symphysiotomy, and only one of these women has seen her appeal go through the courts. This is obviously quite urgent because these women are very old. There's only 200 of them still alive, and the issue keeps being pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed, and it needs to be dealt with soon while these women are still alive and while these women can see some kind of compensation for what happened to them. There is a Facebook group called Survivors of Symphysiotomy. They are quite active, so if you want to get involved, get in touch with them. I'm sure they'd love it. And that's the end of me. Let's move swiftly towards the pub via the Migrant Rights Centre.